In the 41st millennium, the Emperor gets a lot of press, as well he should. He was the big man with the big plan. He was going to take on and defeat the Chaos Gods, then usher humanity into a new golden age where our species could make buku bucks. Honestly, that was partly just an excuse for me to say buku bucks, because it is very fun to say. Now, granted, that plan failed in a most spectacular fashion, but it was grand, no one's had any better ideas, and now his continued life is the only thing keeping humanity afloat. It's fair that the big guy would get a lot of attention. His sons get a lot of attention as well, since they're just mini versions of the Big E, but with more personalities. Not always great personalities, but personality nonetheless. And they all come with their own color scheme and legion of super soldier 6-year-olds. However, all of this only covers one, at most 2 armies in 40k, out of the 18 armies currently filling up the game. 19 if you consider Imperial Agents to be an army, which you shouldn't. And each of those armies have their own leaders, their own big E's, their own big cheese. So let me take you on a little meet and greet with the leadership of every other faction that isn't the Space Marines. We'll go in alphabetical order just to keep things simple and start with the Adeptus Sororitas. As the militant version of the Ecclesiarchy, the group that makes sure you worship the Emperor at least 3 times a day, they are technically led by the Ecclesiarch, who is the head of the Imperial Church. If you're thinking of the Pope, you're completely correct, except the Ecclesiarch can be female. Sometimes the Ecclesiarch is good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're Goj Vandire, who came to the conclusion that everyone was against him, so burn them all, and decided that the Oath of Celibacy was completely optional. However, just below them is the Abbess Sanctorum. So if the Ecclesiarch is the Pope President, taking care of all of the church, the Abbess Sanctorum is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, just taking care of the military stuff. And currently, this is one Morven Vahl. You see, originally Miss Vahl was picked for this position in order to be a sort of puppet of the higher priests. Someone who would be quiet, meek, and spend most of their military career manning a desk. This appointment has backfired massively, as Vahl is aggressive, known to violate orders whenever she has a better idea. When has that ever happened in Warhammer? And as should be evident by her having a model on the tabletop, is known for leading from the front. So even though she holds a provisional seat in the Imperial Senate, she's more likely to send a liaison as she keeps stomping around in her military-grade power loader, which is covered in religious decals. I'm sure you would do the same. Next up is an organization that is much more straightforward, the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's very own secret service. The head of the service is known as the Captain General, and who is the Captain General right now? This guy, Trajan Valoris. Unfortunately, there's not much that can be said about Trajan that couldn't be said about most other Custodes. He practiced killing stuff, got really good at killing stuff, took part in some big battles where, shock, he got to kill some big stuff, and otherwise spends most of his time tending the velvet rope outside the Big E's man cave. At one point, Trajan was considered to be the single deadliest person in the entire Imperium, though now that the dads are coming back, he's almost certainly lost that position. Not to diminish his skill, but in a 1v1 between him and the Lion, I'm not betting my money on Trajan, no matter what the Custodes fans may tell me. Okay, simple explanations are over as it's time to cover the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, their biggest man-robot centipede thing on the tabletop is Belisarius Cawl. And Cawl is a very important individual, networked with a lot of major players, and is famous for making Space Marines 2.0. However, he is not the big boss of the Mechanicus. Call's tried for the office several times and is still trying, but the guy's a loose cannon on a good day, and a divisive figure every day. Meaning that the Mechanicus would immediately fall into civil war if Cawl ever held the top office. The name of that office being the Fabricator General of Mars, a position currently held by someone or something known as Aeldari Rasikin. I don't know anything about them. There's barely anything on them to learn because all the characterization budget has already been spent on Cawl. The lesson here is that being the leader of a faction does not make you the most interesting character in that faction, or even guarantee you much of a character at all. Now, keep that lesson in mind as we approach the tried and true Imperial Guard, where you would think that a military organization would have a clear hierarchy of command for who's on top. That's what I thought, and I was wrong. Because there's the Lord Militant who has a provisional seat on the Imperial Senate, but there's barely anything about the office or its holders. But then there are the Lord Commanders who have their multiple subgroups depending on the Navy, Army, Air Force, etc., who are outranked by the Lord Militant, but also get a provisional seat on the Senate. So I'm not really sure of anything, but I'll throw my attention towards the Lord Solar Leontis. Now, Arcadian Leontis is sort of the Roberto Gorilla Man of the Imperial Guard. Both are a bit generic, are well-respected and highly capable military commanders who have become disillusioned thanks to the Imperium's more vile tendencies, but still strive to protect it because humanity is worth protecting. The differences occur in that Leontis was born to a noble family on Terra, whereas Guilliman had the Metro Man good fortune to have his gestation pod land in the living room of a noble family on Macragge. Also, Leontis rides a Bioshock Infinite-style robot horse named Constantine, whereas Guilliman rides a white-haired Eldar named Yvraine. After that, there are my personal favorites in the Imperial Agents, where they could be led by any number of people. They could be led by the inquisitorial representative to the Senate. They could also be led by the Grand Provost Marshal of the Adeptus Arbites, who holds an equivalent seat on the Senate. They could be led by the Paternoval Envoy of the Navis Nobility, who also holds a seat on the Senate. They could be led by the Grand Master of Assassins, who also holds a seat on the Senate. Or, since they have Sororitas in their ranks for some reason, they could also be led by the Ecclesiarch, who is also a sitting member on the Senate. I'll tell you what, I will tell you who leads the Imperial Agents just as soon as they figure it out for themselves. And while I'm on the topic of factions pretending to be a full army, who leads the Grey Knights? Well, since they're just Space Marines with an even higher barrier for entry, they follow a chapter master named Kaldor Drago. Now, the cool thing about Drago is that he is a very jacked up psyker that looks at the corrupting power of the warp and just says no. Void ships need something called a Geller field, one of the most powerful pieces of technology in the Imperium to safely navigate the warp, but Drago just says no, and walks right through it. For goodness sake, he carries an actual demon sword as his primary weapon. A sword that is constantly trying to corrupt his mind, and he just says, no. Fulgrim, eat your heart out. And the final faction within the Imperium is the Imperial Knights, who genuinely don't have a single leader because they don't have a single faction. Knights come from various and spread out knight worlds with their own various customs. Some follow kings, some follow queens, some follow a combination of the two. Some of them are more closely tied with the traditional Imperium, some are more closely tied with the Mechanicus. They're a bunch of wacky noble houses, but they have big mechs, so let them do what they want. Moving into Chaos, who runs Chaos? Well, it's these guys. Who else would it be? Do you really think anyone but the Chaos Gods would run the Chaos factions? True, there is a bad in the despoiler, and credit where it's due, he is the main reason that Chaos is any sort of unified threat. Without him, the traitor Space Marines would be just a bunch of disparate warbands killing each other as much as anyone else. Much like the Orks in that way, but I digress. Point is, while Abaddon may be the big face of the operation, he still has to get his funding from the Big Four, though they function more as individuals than any sort of group. The whole is far less than the sum of its parts, because there was never and will never be a whole. The gods don't hate living beings, just more souls for the warp after all, but they do hate each other. Nurgle favors stagnation while Tzeentch wants to change things up. Khorne wants to kill things, while Slaanesh wants to do everything but kill. Add to this the fact that every soul sacrificed to one god is one that doesn't go to the other three, leaving them in a situation where we have 4 malevolent cosmic entities all trying to squeeze through the same door to get to the pot of gold on the other side. Only the door is a massive tear in the fabric of space-time, and the pot of gold is all of us, and kind of the Eldar too. However, for all of their hatred, no Chaos God will ever kill one of their siblings, because they're all literally made from the same stuff, maybe more like clones than siblings. So, at worst, if one were to die, it would destabilize the warp and potentially create a cascade that wipes out the other 3. At best, it would be a message, horrifying to them but potentially unifying to the rest of the universe, that these terrible gods can be killed. So, even Khorne likes to keep war as a thing that happens over there, to other people, even as he thinks every day about cracking open his younger sister's skull. Now we can begin with the Xenos, and specifically the Eldar. Oh man, you want to know who leads the Eldar? Boy, I'll tell you who leads the Eldar. You really want to know who leads the Eldar? Because I'll tell you, the leader of the Eldar is... This is another annoying thing about the elves. They are not nearly as unified as they'd have you believe. So imagine if the Space Marines weren't under one umbrella of the wider Imperium. You'd have some Marines that deal in stealth, some Marines that deal in machinery, some that deal in boredom, so on and so on. And who leads them? You could get 3 completely different answers and they'd all be technically correct. It is maddening. For the sake of the video, we'll say it's Yvraine, and I don't want to hear anyone mention Eldrad. I went over the long and the short of Yvraine's deal in my video about her and Gilbert, but I'll review briefly for those of you that came here first. Yvraine, big deal elf woman who can come back from the dead thanks to her pact with the Eldar god of death, and the 2 of them, plus elves of every color, are trying to start a hype train which they can ram down Slaanesh's throat. Dark Eldar are much simpler. They're led by this guy named Vecht. Asdrul Bal Vecht. Or to use his full name, Asdrul Bal, I invented CP increases, Vecht. He's pretty easy to understand. In a subspecies known for torture, backstabbing, and constantly grasping for even the barest hint of power, this guy is the most torturous, deceitful, and power-hungry being in the galaxy, who isn't a Chaos God. He's pretty neat, and possibly maybe the only Eldar left who predates Slaanesh. And if all that weren't enough to convince you, he has his own theme song. Are ya ready, meat puppets? I can't hear you. Oh! Who lives in a city inside the webway? Asdrul Bal Vecht. Who slaughters and tortures millions each day? Asdrul Bal Vecht. If bloodshed and mayhem be something ye wish, Asdrul Bal Vecht. Then come to Kamara and you'll be his bitch. Really neat guy. And I'd love to play the Dark Eldar if they weren't constantly being chokeslammed by GW. Next on the list is the Genestealer Cults. Who leads the Genestealer Cults? Well, I'll give you 900 trillion guesses and counting. Leagues of Votann are next in the alphabet. Yes, the dwarves are back, and they're pissed, and the big man in charge is Uthar the Destined. As the name might imply, he's seen to be destined for greatness, and possesses a great ability to read his enemies. And I'll end it there because if I go on any longer, this brief summary might end up being longer than the actual biography of the character. But from a leader who's too short, to a leader who's too long, there is the Necrons' very own Silent King. Now, I'm going to try to be brief here because this is one of those characters that if I talk about him for 5 minutes, I'm going to end up talking about him for an hour. He is one of the major players on the galactic stage, with the wiki resume to back that up. So, this guy was the leader of the Necrons all the way back when they were still skin, bone, and tumors. He was the one to broker a deal with the godly Votann to have the species trade out their cancerous flesh for immortal metal. Then he was the one to lead the revolution against the Votann and break them into shards. And finally, when all the Necrons went to sleep, the Silent King went into self-imposed exile, as penance for turning 9/10 of his people into dispassionate robots. And the last 10th are also robots, they're just not dispassionate. But now he's back to rally his people after he realized that the Tyranids were coming and about to kill everyone and everything. This has met with limited success. Some people like him, some people have been getting along just fine without him and want to keep doing that, but he is still the head honcho of the robot skeletons. Sort of the Necrons' own version of the Emperor. He had big plans to solve the big problems of his species. Those plans backfired in a truly fantastic way, and now they are the only things holding their respective empires together. In the Emperor's case, it's more technical as he powers the Astronomicon, and in the Silent King's case, he is the only thing keeping the Necrons from falling into massive civil war. Now we move on to reach the character which may or may not be the whole reason I wanted to make this video. Orc Warboss Supreme and Prophet of the Great Wa, Ghazghkull Maguric Thraka, and Makari. Orc hierarchy is pretty straightforward. Big Orc, that's your boss. Bigger Orc, that's your boss's boss, and so on, until you reach the biggest orc in existence, which is currently Gaz. He got to be so large through grit, determination, divine intervention on behalf of the orc gods, and a little bit of good old-fashioned insanity. But the day that someone can show me a sane orc is the same day that I give up show business. Gaz has been called the Prophet of the Great Wa with good reason, because you will never find a green meanie who is more zealous. He's also got Makari, his personal goblin. I know they're called grots, but let's be real here. And this little guy serves as Ghazghkull's all-purpose standard bearer, personal assistant, unofficial therapist, and occasionally stress relief toy. It's about as close to a romantic relationship as a 40k orc has ever gotten. Second to last, there are the Tau. Of course, they're led by the ethereal caste of their society, and for a long time the head ethereal supreme was called Un Va. And if you think he looks like a prophet from Halo, good job, that means you're paying attention. And much like the prophets, he got unseated from power in a very dramatic fashion. Now it's a bit up in the air who the new big raisin will be, but we do have two important commanders in the meantime. First, there's Commander Farsight. If you've seen those shorts I make where I say a certain 40k character is just like another character, well, it's only a matter of time until I compare Commander Farsight to Big Boss. Because both of them went on a super important mission for their governments, got disillusioned in the process, came back, refused a handshake, defected, and now run a group of highly effective soldiers out in the middle of nowhere. The only difference is that Farsight is not being hunted by his own clone. I'm like 90% sure that's how Metal Gear Solid went. Please be patient with me, I have trouble keeping track of MGS lore on a good day. Instead, his main rival is the new Commander Shadowsun, most well known for her massive fashion overhaul, turning the Tau from orange to her more preferred white. She's known for being patient, reserved, and highly effective. So if you can imagine the no-nonsense soldier lady archetype from various media sources, take your pick, but blue and alien, then here you go. And finally, there are the Tyranids. Bugs are led by a hive mind, and in this case it is known as the Norn Queen. We really don't know much about them other than the fact that they exist, and to be frank, that's probably for the best. Because whatever these things are, they're not just the things that make Tyranids, they're the things that design them. It is what does all the high-level thinking for the rest of the swarm. There may be high-intelligence life forms in the Tyranid ranks. The Swarm Lord and the Death Leaper may even be sapient. But these things are even above them. They are not the final boss of 40k because that would imply that you can kill them. Maybe others can, but not you. You're gonna have enough trouble dealing with their master-crafted creations. And that's the one thing all these leaders have in common. With them or against them, there is a whole lot of mass under their command, and anyone out to get them is gonna have to cut through a whole lot of it before they can speak to whoever's in charge. You know, unless you're being a Vindicare assassin. One shot, one kill. Congratulations, bucko, you've just cut off the head of a great and powerful army. Now do it 21 more times. But Stroke did exist, and buckle in, this shit's gonna get wacky, because I have to go all the way back to the beginning. Ancient Mesopotamia, Greek for between rivers, is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, civilization in human history. Yeah, I said we were going all the way back to the beginning.